Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm very excited to present this work. We think it's a little bit different than some other works in that we take a really inductive approach to trying to understand state behavior within an international organization, within a really important international organization. So what are the goals of the paper? Okay, so the first goal here is to provide a map of UN climate politics, where we measure and identify countries' positions, but also those positions relative to each other country. So what we try to do is try to find similarities between two separate countries, each country with each other, in the UN climate regime, and we use that using text analysis, which I'll get into in a moment. And then we're going to explore these positions and how they're interconnected across time and across countries. We use developed versus developing countries as the main axis with which we divide the countries, and we analyze the strength and the weakness of this division and some characteristics of this division. And then we look at different party groupings to see how these pairs of countries that are within the same party group, that are across party groups, how they speak differently in an international organization. So there's been abundant research on climate negotiation positions and their connections up to about 2012. This has been less so in the recent post-Paris years, and that's kind of where we come in and try to shed some light on these dynamics. Much of this research, basically takes for granted or assumes, and reasonably so, that there is an Annex 1 versus a non-Annex 1 divide. So much of this existing research kind of takes it for granted or assumes that there's this Annex 1 versus non-Annex 1 divide. And what we do is we try and interrogate this a little bit. And we find, that this is a really important division within the UN, but there's also other divisions as well. And there's also limitations to that division. At the same time, there's also fragmentation across groups, and there's different positions across developed and developing countries. So, even though we know that there's a big difference between developed and developing countries, between Annex 1 and non-Annex 1 countries, what are the divisions within these groups? Or is there homogeneity within the Annex 1 group and similar amounts of homogeneity among the non-Annex 1 group? Where there's fragmentations and where there's cohesion within these groups, and especially the party groupings which we look to later. So this debate is embedded in larger discussions about, hierarchy and heterogeneity across international politics. There's the North-South divide, but there's a lot of heterogeneity across each divide. So our claim is that, of course, the Annex 1 versus non-Annex 1 lens should matter in the recent Paris Accord years. We're not going to try and argue that this doesn't actually exist. At the same time, these categories do not explain everything. They cannot possibly predict positions and association across countries that are within these groups. And there's also similarities across countries, across groups between pairs of countries. Geography matters, shared history, linguistic affinity, UN ideal points. These all are going to determine similarities across countries. And those are the things we really interrogate here. So while there's a lot of homogeneity within countries, we're going to explore these cross-cutting divisions and try and characterize how deep this division actually is. And the way we do that is through text. The core assumption here is that we should be able to measure the natural position of their countries through text. So this is an exercise in text analysis. We use automated text analysis to answer these questions and to study it. So here are some expectations. One of the expectations is that countries' positions are sticky over time. Meaning that there's not a lot of change in the country position in the UNFCCC from one year to the next. I'm not going to go deep into the evidence supporting this in this presentation. It's in the paper, and we use a number of different ways to test this. We use the frequency of some keywords, which we find are very similar across time. And we also have a model that predicts out of sample, basically, yearly meetings, and is able to predict, with pretty good accuracy, which country is which. So if you take all but one of the yearly meetings, you're able to predict the out of sample accuracy quite well. There's also clusters that we're going to investigate, not only the Annex 1 and non-Annex 1 countries, but countries in party groups across these clusters. And what we're going to investigate in a regression framework, what is driving this similarity across countries? What are the external sources? What are the big divides or the big factors driving a divide or similarity across countries that is in addition to the Annex 1 versus non-Annex 1 division? So the research design. What we did is we web scraped, downloaded and translated the UNFCCC high-level statements by the national representatives for each yearly meeting from 2010 to 2016. The total is about 959 statements for 169 countries. The vast majority of these countries participated in about 5 or more of these meetings. There were some countries that only participated in 1 or 2. And for the main analysis that we present in this paper, we're going to look at only statements by countries that present, I think, at 5 or more meetings. This threshold, if we do 4 or more meetings or 3 or more meetings, we vary that in the paper and the results are the same. So these are the actual statements, the text that that were uploaded to the UNFCCC website that we downloaded, scraped, made readable if they weren't readable, had already cleaned that data, and then translated using the Google Translate API, which is not the web-based one, but as a more sophisticated translation software to get everything in English and to be machine readable. So we use a range of text as data approaches. The core one that I'm going to present here, that's really the heart of the paper, is word embeddings. So word embeddings are a form of non-parametric text analysis approach that it kind of gets rid of the core assumption of many topic models, which is the bag of words approach. So topic models treat all words independently of each other, and they don't really care about word order. Our approach we use by using word embeddings uses doc2vec, which takes a document vector, which is just a long string of numbers. We use a length of 200 that increases the likelihood of those actual words in the text being the highest prediction, the range of vector that predicts those words. And the key thing here is that it takes word order into account, which is a little different than other approaches that have been used in the past. And this is really, this is a really interesting and powerful tool that's being used in a lot of political science research now that we think is really exciting, has a lot of power to understand political behavior. These words are mapped to vectors that capture the co-occurrence within a specified range, which is a key. It's not, if a word appears in the beginning of the document and the word appears at the end of a document, that's weighed differently than if they're very close to each other. What we do is we generate these, vectors of length 200 for each country. We collapse the text across all years into one giant document, and then we get a document vector for that country. And then since it's a vector, what we can do is for 2 countries, say the US and the UK, we have 200 numbers here and 200 numbers here, and we just measure the similarity using the cosine similarity, which is a very basic and simple understanding of similarity between covariates. I'm going to get to the results here. So this is one of the main heat maps we produce. So in the upper left grouping, that's the non-Annex 1 versus Annex 1 heat map. So these are country pairs. These are all dyads at the dyad level, where red indicates more similar pairs and white indicates less similar pairs. So these are countries. This is the non-Annex 1, Annex 1 divide right here in the upper left corner. Lower left triangle, that's the non-Annex 1 countries. So we see not as high red, but we see than we do in the upper right corner, which is the Annex 1 countries, but we still see this divide here. All these scores are normalized, so they're roughly standardly normally distributed. And the big thing here is that the Annex 1 versus Annex 1, these dyads are really high in red. These countries are very similar to each other. So this is the main characterization of the Annex 1, non-Annex 1 divide. Annex 1 is really homogeneous. Non-Annex 1 countries are not very homogeneous. So we put this into a regression format where the unit of the observation is a dyad. And we say, what predicts these similarity scores? So we see here that, both Annex 1, of course, predicts a higher similarity score, both countries being a non-Annex 1 actually doesn't increase the similarity score after you account for these other variables. That includes the CRI difference, which is the difference in the climate risk index scores. So, you know, how much is vulnerability to climate change driving these similarities. And the interesting result we think is, which is the interesting result, is when we interact these CRI difference with both Annex 1 and non-Annex 1. And what we see is that this risk to climate change really is driving similarity differences only for non-Annex 1 countries. The third main result that I'm going to present very quickly, the table is very large, so we're not going to show that, is that we divide party groupings into two sets. There's mixed and homogeneous groups. The mixed groups are the EIG, Umbrella, ASOS, OPEC, and the homogeneous groups are one that are, you know, more geographically homogeneous, that are grouping countries together that already have an existing interest. And when we put those in the same regression framework, membership in a homogeneous group has a positive and significant effect on dyad level similarity. Membership in mixed groups has null effects. And what we're really interpreting this to be is that these mixed groups are not really driving similarities across countries, and that these homogeneous groups are really reifying existing similarities across country pairs. Very briefly, the implications here is that there's a serious, this division remains between the Annex 1 and non-Annex 1 is very serious for the UNFCCC cooperation, but you know, recent statements do cross borders. We do see that happening. Ecological vulnerability is an important driver of similarity in positions related to climate change, but it's only driving this for non-Annex 1 dyads. And Annex 1 dyads are other things, non-climate risk, things not related to risk of vulnerability is not driving anything in these Annex 1 dyads. Negotiating groups influence the way countries converge on common issues, but at the same time, developed countries and richer countries have the most similar and consistent positions. And we think this is one reason why they become, you know, almost hegemonic in this IO, is because they're very coordinated, they're very similar, they can present a unified front. And, you know, this is not a new conclusion, but I think we shed some light on it and present a unique and new way of trying to support that claim. Thank you so much. Oh, there is one last thing is that these results confirm that there are some interests that do not overlap much, and that this is really creating an echo chamber where we have a really unified Annex 1 country and non-Annex 1 countries are speaking to each other. Thank you so much.